Hi, I'm Rod Gilley. I'm a writer. Some of the video here is a little bit rough, but please stick with us because this is a fascinating interview. Our guest today is J.C. Keough from Kenmare, Ireland. She was kind enough to send us some photographs from her personal collection. Ireland really is beautiful. In this picture, I think she looks really tiny. I love the rainbow. And look how beautiful the foliage is in the foreground. And it's got a castle in the background. That's cool. She does look like she's relaxing and enjoying the pretty scenery. This is my favorite picture that she sent us. I think it's absolutely beautiful. I used it for the thumbnail. Well, that was kind of fun looking at the neat pictures. Let's go on with the show. I think you're really going to enjoy meeting J.C. Keough. Hi, Jenny. How are you doing today?
Just fine, Rod. I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Oh, pretty good, pretty good. Very excited about today's show. I
Me too.
have, I have to ask you because it's so different for me. I haven't really got to travel a lot in my life. For you to boldly pick up from Dallas, Texas, and take off to Ireland is so exciting. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about maybe the cultural differences or anything about Ireland.
Okay. So I'm a Texas girl, born and bred. I love Texas so much. But my husband, he has his Irish citizenship through his family. He also grew up in Texas, and he all said that when he retired, he wanted to move to Ireland. So when we got married, that was kind of the agreement. I honestly never thought it would happen. I just kept thinking, that won't happen. But here we are, and we've been in Ireland about 6 years now. And it is, you pick a country that people speak English, so you think, oh, it's really not going to be that big of a jump. But it is, every culture has their differences, but the Irish have been very welcoming to us, very friendly people. We moved, I had grown up in a small town, but the last 25 years before we moved, we lived in Dallas, which is a huge town. And now we're back in Ireland in a very small rural town. But it's just gorgeous. The scenery is gorgeous. The people are wonderful. The learning curve probably isn't as big as like I was saying, if we'd moved somewhere with a different language, but it still is a difference. But I have to say the summers being so much cooler are really nice. But then I miss in the winter, it's pretty gray and rainy here, and I miss the Dallas sun or the Texas sun. So that's kind of the main difference. Good weather sometimes, worse weather other times. We came here thinking, how great the summers would be, that it would be so much cooler than Dallas, which it is, but it's also cooler than what we expected. A lot of the summers, the average temperature is in the low 60s, pretty much for the whole summer. And so that sounds wonderful when you're sitting in Dallas at 104, 105, but then, go somewhere where you're basically always chilly, that's kind of different too, though.
Yeah, I would imagine not quite a lot of time on the beach.
No.
Yeah.
The thing is, they actually do have gorgeous beaches here. And
Oh.
when you get a few warm days and the sun comes out, that's everybody heads for the beach because, you're only going to get a few days a year that it's really, really gorgeous to be on the beach most years. So when the sun comes out and it warms up, everybody goes. Actually, our house is overlooks one of the bays in Ireland, and we're kind of up on a hill, and our back patio looks out over Kenmare Bay, and we live near the village of Kenmare, and then looks out over mountain range. And these aren't mountains like you imagine for Colorado or the Blue Ridge Mountains. These aren't mountains of that size. They're much smaller, but they're just stunning. And so that's really a big difference. And we always talk about that when we step out our back door and the view is just so amazing that if we ever just step out and don't stop and say, oh my goodness, how amazing is that? It's time to go home. And so we've been here for 6 years, and it's still, every time I look out the back door, it just takes my breath away.
Well, I'll tell you what, how about we go ahead and jump into the questions real quick?
Okay.
The first question, and these are standard, I ask everyone, do you consider yourself to be a pantser or a plotter, and why?
Okay, so I've watched a couple of your other videos, and I think I'm going to kind of carry on the tradition here, and that I started as a pantser, but I am now absolutely a plotter.
Are you?
My first book I started, and the thought of outlining everything just kind of overwhelmed me. And so I had heard where a lot of people just sit down and write. And so I thought, well, that I can do. And so I did that. But that book was supposed to be about, in my mind, I had planned it to be about 80,000 words. And when I finished the first draft, I was at 140,000 words.
Oh.
And so that was a huge amount of time, revisions and moving things around and cutting things. So with each book, I do a little bit more plotting. And the current one that I'm working on, I actually went through and I have plotted out a scene. I have a scene art and every scene is plotted out. So I am now definitely a plotter.
Oh.
But I didn't start that way.
I'm on the other side of the fence. I just can't get over the fun that I have looking at a blank page, typing a paragraph with no idea what the next paragraph is going to be. And I enjoy the excitement of seeing where it's going. So I guess I'll always be a pantser. But you made a very valid point. Being a pantser does equate to a lot of work in editing. The next question that I would ask is, and I think this is always a good question because I think every writer has challenges, and day-to-day life is our biggest challenge. Just finding the time to, sit down and write a chapter. You hear a lot of people on YouTube say, I cranked out 3,000 words today. Well, that must be nice, but I rarely have that kind of time. How do you balance life and your writing?
Well, I always, exactly what you're saying. You hear people, they sit down and they've put out all these words. And I always, when I see someone with a full-time job and that they seem to be also writing full-time and putting out book after book, I bow down to them. That is amazing. And I always, I was one of these people that I always wanted to write. I always said, someday I'm going to write. But the whole time when I had a full-time job, when I would come home, it just wasn't there mentally. I just really couldn't sit down. So I admire the heck out of anybody who can work full-time or even really part-time, a solid job, and then come home and write. Yeah. So my writing really never happened until I retired from a full-time career. And I do still kind of work part-time. My husband and I have a small business here that I kind of do the books on. But mainly, even without that full-time job, sometimes it's really hard to sit down and write because you always think, oh, well, since I don't have the structure, I can push it back. I'll write later. I'll do this. I'll do that. So I've really found that I have to focus on scheduling, and then I have to focus on treating writing like a career. Like if I really want this to be my second act, I have to treat it as a job, as a career, and make the time for it. And that involves a lot of scheduling. Now, some days, obviously, I'm better at that than others. There are a lot of other things I want to do. As we've already talked about, I live in a beautiful place, and I like to go out and hike and do different things. So sometimes it's a juggle. But at the base of it all, I try and remind myself this is my career, and I want writing to be my full-time second act career. Yeah. And so that's just a point of sitting down and doing it.
Mm-hmm. I use Windows Calendar, and it's very good. It's got all these little colored boxes for different categories of work. It's so wonderful. But I'm a lifelong procrastinator.
Same.
And I'm so good at pushing those little blocks to the next day.
Yeah, when you can just click and drag. Oh, yes.
Okay, now this should be fun. Which of any story you've ever written, a novel, a short story, any of them, which comes to mind when I ask you, what was your favorite story you ever wrote?
Well, I'm going to turn that just a little bit before I really answer your question. My favorite story is always the story I haven't written. The story that's in my mind is always so much better than anything I'm working on and slogging through. So often my favorite story is always the story I haven't written. But as for the ones that I've written, Dying in Dallas, which was my first novel, is my absolute favorite. I call it the story of my heart. And it was something that was in my head for years and years. And when I kept saying, someday I'm going to be a writer, someday I'm going to write a novel. And so I finally sat down and wrote that. And it took me 4 years to back and forth writing and then figuring out everything. But that is the story. I feel that's the novel that made me a novelist, that proved that, yes, I can sit down and do it. And also I love the story, and it's the first book in a series, and I just love the whole series. I'm working on the 3rd book in the series now, and I really enjoy writing that. But that's my favorite, not only for the story, but because that was my breakthrough, that I finally did what I always said I was going to do.
Cool. All right. Next question. To the best of your memory, what was the hardest scene that you ever wrote?
Okay, I gave that a lot of thought, and I cannot pin it down to one scene. And so for me, in every book or even a short story, the hardest scene is always the scene where, I guess, the killer is exposed, and that you have to, make all your points line up. So tie up all the loose threads, talk about all the motives, all the reason, prove that the killer did it, what his motivations were, how the murder took place. That for me, every time is the hardest scene. And so talking about being a procrastinator, usually when I get to that point in the book, sometimes I have to set the book. I might not write the scene for 2 or 3 weeks because I know that's going to be a really hard scene to write. And I always keep pushing it off. I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow. And then suddenly I'll realize like 3 weeks have gone by, and I'll say, okay, I have to do it. And then, once you sit down and write it, I won't say it's not as hard as you thought it was going to be, but once it's done, it's like, oh, okay. And then the rest of it just flows after that. But that for me, because it's usually kind of so technical and having to pull everything together, it's so hard. That's also one of the reasons too, I lean more towards being a plotter now than the pantser, because being a pantser, it made it so hard to remember like what all the clues were, what all the red herrings were, that you have to address them all in that scene. And that made it so hard if I was just throwing stuff around willy-nilly in the book. Yeah. So for me, and this is like people that work full-time and write. For pantsers who can do that, I'm so, that's amazing that people can do that. It's absolutely amazing. I thought I would be one of those people, but I'm not. I have to have it a little bit more structured. But anyway, that's the hardest scene for me in every book is kind of the wrap up, the unveiling and the wrap up.
Oh, yeah, I can see where so much information has to be tied together that, yeah, that would be hard to do just winging it.
And there are people that absolutely can do it and do a phenomenal job at it. I'm just not one of them. I'm not one of them. So,
like in particular, in a mystery murder novel with so many loose ends to tie up and so many details that readers absolutely will catch, So, you make a very, very
they really will.
point. You make a point that I think all the audience will give a lot of thought to, because that's something that you don't realize. I'm going to be a writer. You don't realize what it takes. And you make a very valid point that there's a lot of work to be done. And that's very cool.
Well, thanks. But, I read interviews with other writers who are pantsers, and they'll talk about, as they're writing the book, they don't even know who the murderer is. Yeah. They don't know who the murderer is until they get to that wrap-up scene. I'm thinking, how in the world do you pull that then? And I guess there's probably a lot of revisions that they go back through and make sure it fits. Yeah. But that just is amazing to me that I think it's wonderful that people can do that. I just don't have that kind of talent or memory or whatever. So that's the main reason I'm a plotter now.
Oh, I'm kind of a visual person. I used to paint on canvas and things like that. Mm-hmm. So the way I get through it being a pantser is I visually watch the movie in my head as I go and just watch it develop. And sometimes I'll stare at the blank page and I haven't got a clue. And then there's other times, honestly, the story will take over and tell my fingers where to go. And I'll type away, and get, sometimes I actually will hit the 2,000 word mark. It's rare, but it happens. you know.
Isn't it wonderful though when you get in that state where it just everything
Yeah.
flows and it's like it's writing itself. And I do, even as a plotter, there'll be times, oh, I didn't know this was going to happen.
Uh-huh.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, they said what? And
Oh,
it almost feels like you're not even writing it yourself. It's like it's just
yeah.
kind of flowing through you. It's the best feeling when you have those days.
I think that's when, in any genre, I think that's when an okay book becomes an exceptional novel, is when the story takes over, you know? You're
Mhm.
not necessarily making it go where you want it to go. Now it's just going, you know? And I think that's what makes the
Mhm.
difference, you know? That separates RodGilley from Stephen King. You know, there's a big difference there. So this one should be
and
fun.
and from everything I've read, Stephen King is like a huge pantser. But again, it's so that he talks about that he just sits down and writes and it flows. And imagine that. That's amazing.
Yeah, yeah. I've heard it said that he's a genre of his own, and I agree.
I agree too.
Yeah. So the last question is the standard questions I always ask. This one's usually pretty fun. Try to think of the scene that was the most fun to write, that you just really enjoyed writing that scene.
I'm I'm also kind of gonna jump back to a little bit about what I said before about the hardest scene. My most fun scene, I could not pick one, but in my the first novel I had in that series, I have a character, not the main character, but a side character, and he is just the most fun to write. And anytime he's in a scene, he just exactly kind of what we were talking about. He just takes it over and takes off with it. And that he's not even the main character, but every time he's in a scene, he just somehow becomes the star of that scene and is just so fun and unique. And I don't know where he comes from, but every scene he's in, he takes over and just runs with it. And so it
Yeah.
sounds like I'm talking about like a live person, but it's so funny. And I get that feeling of like, oh, I didn't plan for him to say any of these things. He just took off. So every scene, his name's Owen, and every scene with Owen in it, I love writing. And I just started a new series, and it's totally different genre, but it's set in the same town. And I put Owen into two scenes in this other book just because I wanted to write Owen. I wanted Owen I wanted to get a chance to write Owen. And so he's in my new series, just as again as a small bit character that shows up a couple of times in the story. But just because I was like, I need some time with Owen.
I
So
can
Owen
totally,
is always my favorite scene. Writing with Owen is always my favorite scene.
I can totally understand. I love when your characters come alive like that. That makes your novel rock, you know? But when your characters come to life like that, they will stick with your reader. And I think that's awesome. You know, I think that's just super. Um, so that completes our questions. And now I'm going to get to what I'm
Okay.
sure anyone watching will be very excited to hear about. And that is your novel, Dying in Dallas. Ooh, I like the title.
Yes. So this was the first novel I wrote. I'm going to hold it up here, if that's okay.
Uh-huh.
Dying in Dallas, and it is a urban fantasy book, and it's based on a character named Laramie who has a dog-friendly wine bar that she's trying to get open, and she has a dog who also takes over a lot of the scenes. Bodacious. Bodacious takes over a lot of the scenes she's in, but Laramie's trying to get her business open, and she is attacked on the eve of her 30th birthday.
Oh,
And then she's also framed for murder. And then she notices all these strange things are happening and realizes that she's turning into a vampire. And so the
oh,
book is her trying to keep from changing into a vampire, try to get out of being framed for murder. And then she finds out all this stuff about what her ex-husband was involved in and what his best friend, who's still part of her life, what he's involved in. And she kind of gets dragged along into all this. And so that's the first story in it's the Laramie Harper Chronicles. This is the name of the series. This is the first book about Laramie dying in Dallas.
wow. I'm going to have to hurry up and get that link down in the description so I can hurry to Amazon and buy a copy. because it sounds cool. It really does. It sounds awesome. And is she like
It's funny because
teenage, early
but
20s? She's right around 30?
she's 29.
Uh-huh.
She's just about to turn 30. And so I thought that it would be the funny part of it is with her getting attacked and this change starting to her being a vampire right before she turns 30 is that if she ends up turning into a vampire, she'll be 29 forever.
Wow.
And so I thought that there was a funny thing in that you could always every year from now on she's going to be 29.
Yeah.
I just thought that was a funny little thing to throw in.
Well, I like the whole change
So
thing that she's trying to adapt and handle. You know, it's sort of like puberty to the 10th power, you know, like mega change. Sounds fantastic. Yeah, I can't wait to read it. I'm eagerly going to go after that. Okay, we've got a little time left. If you'd like to say a few words to the audience, you're certainly welcome to. If you'd like to promote your website or anything like that, now's the time.
Well, I want to say to you, thank you for including me on your show. And the thing, most of my books have a Southern flair. They all involve wine and dogs. Well, I say that one of my books is more about cats, but that's why I have the wine glass. Everything involves wine. But I want to say, so I'm in my wine glass tonight, actually champagne. One of my goals this year was to be in a live interview or, a video interview. I've been in several written interviews, but this is my first video, live interview kind of situation. And so I really appreciate you having me on your show. Thank you so much. So cheers to you. And as far as the audience, you can find me at my website, jckeough.com. And I'll send you the information. So hopefully you can drop a link down in the description.
Certainly.
And that's where you can find out about the books that I write, a little bit more about me. And obviously I'm on social media, Facebook, Instagram. And so that's really it.
Well, I've got to say, it's been so much fun. It's just so fascinating that you and your husbands were police officers, and especially in a big town like Dallas. Wow. And then having the courage. I mean, I haven't met your husband, but I'm envisioning him and you in capes, boldly going. It's so cool that you took off and went to Ireland. I wish I had the courage and the audacity to just go like that. I'd love to do it, but I know I'll chicken out.
Well, I honestly have to say he kind of dragged me kicking and screaming. Dragged me. I was determined. I really just never thought it would happen. And then as it got closer and closer, I was kind of like, oh my God, this is actually going to happen. And so, and it's interesting moving. When we brought our 2 dogs with us, the 2 dogs we had at the time, they traveled with us to Ireland, and just quite the experience moving house and with 2 medium-sized dogs moving, halfway around the world. But it's great, now that we're here and that we've had the experience we have, I wouldn't have changed anything about it.
Well, I want to say a couple of words to the audience. First of all, look at the high caliber of authors, the writers that are on this show. How could I be so blessed? I don't know. But this has been such an awesome episode. I am so thrilled that you did the show. Thank you for coming on, and I sure hope you'll come back. Love to have you on the show again. And
great. Thank you for having me, and I'll come back anytime.
And to any writer out there, see the last slide on this video. You'll see my email address and Twitter address. And just contact me. Let me know that you've written a short story. It could be your very first work. Or Stephen King, if you're watching, you're welcome on the show. But really, it's been so much fun. And I want to ask real quickly, Dying in Dallas is not a standalone book, right? It's part of a series?
It's part of a series. It's the first book in the series. And after that, I have a novella written that's also out called The Blood Will Tell. Ooh. And then I'm currently working on it's the second full novel in the series, but really the third installment, and it's Whining in Wolfland. And I hope to have it out in early 2023.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for doing the show. I'm so glad that you had the time to visit. It's been so nice. It really has. Thank you.
been great. Thank you for having me.